Hey everybody. So, falling. You've probably done it before. I've probably done it before. I think I can reasonably say all of us have probably done it at some point or another. So it's honestly kind of surprising it took this long for someone to make a Minecraft map about it. Welcome back to Minecraft Maps 10 years later, a series where I take a look at some of Minecraft's most famous maps and play them in a recent version to see just how well they hold up over time. Why am I doing this? I don't know. Last episode I played through Hypixel's Herobrine's Mansion, a legendary adventure map that saw a ton of its complex inner workings pretty much obliterated by 10 years of Mojang screwing around. Will other, less complex maps suffer the same fate? Well, let's find out. Today's subject is the Dropper, a name that a lot of you will actually probably know pretty well. Released July 2012 for 1.5 by Bigre? I'm gonna say Bigre. This map's actually a few months older than Herobrine's Mansion, but it's lived on due to the fact that it's sort of become a subgenre among map makers, kind of like spike falls or bottle runs and Happy Wheels. The concept of the Dropper was real simple. You fall, and you try your hardest not to die. Simple in concept, not so much in execution. The idea was super unique for the time, and it got a lot of coverage by Let's Players who wanted to test their skills against the unmatched power of gravity and the ground. Including, I guess, me, since I'm about to load it up for the first time in a lot of years and see just what it's got to offer. You spawn in on this infinite flat expanse of water with only a single building in sight, which I'm supposed to enter to begin the map. The water isn't actually infinite. If you get moving fast enough, you can actually reach the edge. And then you can even make your own dropper by hurling yourself over the edge into the abyss below. Maybe you don't want to do that, but either way, it's pretty cool. You also spawn with this little pig to keep you company. I don't know if he's really supposed to be there, but I appreciate the moral support. The first actual step of the map is to enter the iron building, which I do. Here you can set the time of day, set your spawn point, and so on with a series of convenient wall buttons, but the main event is over here. Now, if you don't know, the general way the map works is as follows. You stand on a little platform, hit a button, and then plummet downward at terminal velocity, trying to avoid being turned into a fine mist by a series of obstacles on the way down. Each level contains a small bit of water at the bottom, which you're supposed to aim for in order to not die. The release mechanism is a simple piston system, so it still works in a modern version, and with that you're dropped down into the dropper's first level. This level is really easy. In fact, I'm not entirely sure you even have to do anything, but it gets the player introduced to the mechanics of the map, so I can understand why it's there. It also looks really cool. That was actually one of the most beloved and definitely most enduring aspects of the map. Like Herobrine's Mansion, it just looks really nice. It's not so much that it's detailed or precisely made, but all the levels have a super unique and eye-catching abstract design that holds up 10 years later. When you reach the bottom of said abstract design, you can search for a hidden diamond that gives you $100 gorillion. Not really. Or you can just continue into the convenient iron tunnel that leads you to the next level. Notably, this little button here actually does two things. It's supposed to set your spawn point and TP you to the next level, but it only does one of these two things. Honestly, 50% ain't bad. That's probably a passing grade somewhere. The reason the spawn point command doesn't work is a similar issue to the one we saw last time. It uses a classic entity radius tag that's supposed to only work on people nearby, but instead it just don't work on anything because it uses syntax that the game can't comprehend. The TP command, thankfully, doesn't do this, so it actually brings you up to level 2. Now for a while after this point, there isn't actually too much that breaks. The map is pretty simple and straightforward, as most of it just involves falling, so there's not too much that could have been damaged over the years. Next level features a sideways forest, and you gotta land in a lake at the bottom. The one after that is one of the more famous designs, with a cool little rainbow spiral pattern that YouTubers really like using in their thumbnails. It's funny because that's probably what I'm gonna do. If you play your cards right, you probably won't have died by this point, since the first 3 levels are basically just straight shots to the bottom. Things start getting tricky around round 4. You see, Bigre was apparently a big fan of trick levels, ones that make it look like you can't get down when actually you can. This one features water hidden in the form of water cars that, if I'm being honest, would probably take you 3 or 4 tries to spot. This sort of duplicitous acts of buffoonery and skylarking are pretty commonplace in the Dropper, so unless you know the map really well, you're most likely going to be dying a few times before you figure out the trick. Thankfully, the map has a fails counter that reminds you of just how many times you biffed it on the way down, which I'm really surprised to say still works exactly like it's supposed to. It's a nice touch. Once you land in the water cars on level 4, you can move on to one of my favorite levels, the mine. Nothing particularly special about this one, I just always thought it looked really neat. Makes me think of that original Diggy Diggy hole animation for some reason. Now, one of the small ways this map does show its age, as stated before, is the simplicity of its builds. Take level 6 for example. Large-scale recreations of rooms and such were actually something Bigre seemed to really enjoy doing, and he did a great job with them, but everything's made of wool and there's not a huge amount of detail. This isn't a dig at the map maker in any way, it's just one of the few indicators of just how old this map is. The levels are still super fun to look at regardless, and since you're falling through them at high speed, it really doesn't matter. Also, there's some sort of weird thing going on with the water here. There's a lot of illegal water placement in this map, probably done with MC Edit, and on occasion it just sort of breaks. Usually it makes the map easier, but it's mostly just weird to look at. After this, we move on to level 7, where we finally get to see the first major screw-up. This level's designed to throw something different at you. It features the classic water under lava trick that everybody thought was like the coolest thing in 2012. There's little signs at the top that indicate which hole you're supposed to go through, i.e. which lava pit has the water under it, and the goal is to hit the correct hole each time on the way down to survive. I memorized what I thought was a pretty good path to take, then jumped down and was burned alive. Okay, maybe I just got the orientation wrong. No. Being the incredibly resourceful individual that I am, I decided to burn myself to death a few more times by jumping into every hole just to make sure before I realized that maybe, just maybe, something might have broken. So instead of going with the standard lava and water separated by signs method, Bigre opted to edit in free-floating areas of lava and water, probably again with MC Edit. But as we saw previously, that doesn't always work like it's supposed to. Somewhere down through the versions, the water in the lava started leaking, thus creating a ton of obsidian and cobblestone, blocking the openings and sort of making this level impossible. Luckily though, this level managed to unscrew itself up by having some water flow down to the floor, allowing you to just bypass the lava entirely and land on the ground. I felt a little bad doing it, but hey, you win some, you lose some. Level 8 doesn't have any problems. It's one of those miniatures again, and involves you jumping into a toilet, which is pretty unique, to say the least. But we ran into some problems again with level 9. This one's pretty different from the others in the map, since it involves mostly parkour and smaller jumps rather than a single massive fall. You're supposed to use these cobwebs to make a series of small jumps and get to the end without falling and dying. There's only one problem. Well, I'll put it lightly, you can't see anything. The entire level is just pitch black. You can barely see 2 feet in front of you, which is a pretty serious problem when you're trying to make 50-foot precision downward jumps. Not to mention that if you actually do make these jumps, you're probably going to die from fall damage before you reach the bottom. The way this one broke is actually really simple, and it once again comes back to command block changes. The pressure plate here is supposed to trigger 2 command blocks that give you the night vision to see where you're going, and the regeneration to heal your shattered ankles after every fall. Unfortunately, they use the old form of the effect command, and the classic potion ID numbers rather than names, which after an event in 1.13 called the flattening, doesn't really work anymore. So I had to do some effect work manually, and after that everything worked just about as well as it could. Pretty much everything works after this point. Level 10 has a cool sideways train thing going on where you have to fall through one of the trains to land safely. The water's a little broken, but otherwise it's good. The next one's called Hell, and it looks pretty much exactly how you'd expect. It does require some semi-fancy dodging, but overall it's pretty simple. Level 12 is a skeleton. Nothing particularly interesting about this one, I just really like skeletons. There's also a ton of these little water bottles scattered around in chests on multiple levels. I actually went back and replayed the map in 1.5, and interestingly enough, they're supposed to be potions. I honestly could not tell you why they've changed, or how, or when, or really anything. Moving on. This map lets you get a sick overhead view of the skeleton level too, probably because Bigre was really proud of it, and understandably so. I mean, if I made a skeleton this big, I'd probably want people to be impressed by it too. But that's not all, because the map immediately afterwards shows you an optical illusion, or excuse me, optical illusio. I'm not entirely sure why, but I mean, it's definitely cool. Here's what it looks like from another angle in case you're wondering how it's done. We've got only a few more levels at this point, so I'm gonna try to speedrun them. Next up is one of the weirder challenges, in which the map forgoes the dropper concept entirely, and has us jump between cobwebs and vines following a trail of pumpkins to get to the exit on the ground, or I guess the ceiling, technically. At this point, I think Bigre just got kind of bored, because he just started putting optical illusions everywhere. We get another one immediately after level 13, it's just sort of there. Awesome. The maps do seem to get more creative and interesting as time goes on though, so I gotta give him credit for that. Level 14 is probably the most famous of the entire set, and weirdly enough, also one of the easiest. There's no obstacles or anything, you just fall down the double-decker death spiral into a tiny pool at the bottom. This would make a cool screensaver, but there ain't too much to say about it otherwise. Level 15 is probably the most creative level in the entire map. I've honestly never seen anything that uses this concept in the time since. It's basically a hacked series of nether portal blocks that follow a winding pattern. Because the in-game time required in contact with a portal block to teleport is about 80 ticks, or 4 seconds, you gotta stay in the portals for as long as possible in order to teleport before you hit the ground and die. In order to do this, you have to follow the winding pattern on the far wall. And it's a lot easier said than done, since if you leave the portal for even a single tick, it'll cancel the teleport. Once you do pull it off though, you get brought to the Nether, where there's a giant model of a heart for some reason. I honestly can't explain half the random stuff in this map. At times it just feels like Bigre was kind of adding in whatever he thought looked cool. Case in point, this thing, there's just this gigantic trippy grid of black wool. It's not a level because level 16 is immediately after this. It's just there. You can hit a button that TPs you to the top, and if you manage to land on this one platform, there's a button that lets you teleport back to the start, like the actual start of the map. I'm not even mad, and this isn't anything that's broken with the map. I'm just confused, really. But moving on, we get to the actual final level of the map, where you fall through a blood vessel and land in a room where you can TP to any of the previous levels, as well as something the map calls the experimental level, which is really just an infinite falling loop where you can contemplate your mistakes until the end of time. The map actually has 2 secret levels that you can only access from this end room. One's another one of those miniature maps, and one of them, no lie, is literally just a clone of another map that Bigre made. He just put one of his other maps into this map. Something was definitely going on in this guy's head when he made this. I just really don't know what. There's also this sign that indicates some sort of beef with another player named Mernsmeyer19, who I can find absolutely no trace of online. This doesn't have any relevance to anything at all, I just wanted to point that out. And that, everyone, is the end of the dropper. Now you might have noticed that despite being slightly older than Herobrine's Mansion, a lot more of this map works. Admittedly, there's a few points you probably wouldn't be able to beat with the map as it is, but on the whole it's held up really well. And this is due almost entirely to how simple it is. Because the map's primary game mechanic is gravity, pretty much nothing about the core experience has changed. The only parts that show their age are some of the builds themselves, and the redstone that makes the map run smoothly. It's pretty impressive, honestly, just how well the map has weathered the test of time, and I doubt that much more will break, even if we look 5 or 10 years in the future. Unfortunately, this also means the boundary break is going to be a hell of a lot less interesting. There's not really much to show for this map. The redstone's super rudimentary, and you can see pretty much everything the map has to offer while you're falling, but there's a few cool things to show nonetheless. A good amount of the levels are actually carved out of a big cube of blocks, probably placed there with MC Edit to make the building more convenient. The winding road map is actually carved into slices. Not sure why, but you can't tell from the portal side of the room, so it doesn't really matter. Most of the levels are clustered together pretty closely except for the last few, presumably to make navigating the map easier, but I can't be certain. The Sideways Trees level looks to have had actual game terrain flipped and pasted in, since there are ores and caves that you never actually see. Some parts of this level even look like 1.5 underwater terrain, but I can't be sure. This is a bit of a small one, but some of the few functioning potions in the map's dispensers are tagged with TMI Unlimited, meaning they were hacked infinite item stacks from too many items, which was the precursor to not enough items, which was the precursor to just enough items. Here's a pretty big one. If we go outside the bounds of the levels and fall all the way down to y=4, we can see this map is actually a super flat world, not suspended in the void like a lot of later maps would be. Also, some of the elements from inside the levels clip through the walls, like these rails from the mine level and netherrack from the hell level. And that's pretty much everything the dropper has to offer. Bigre would go on to make another, more complex dropper map soon after, and in time these would become some of the most influential worlds of all time. Their simplicity and creativeness was already 90% of the appeal, and that's something that never really diminishes over time. This map is just about as fun now as it was 10 years ago, and that's pretty impressive to say the least. Here's one final view of the map as we end off for the day. Or afternoon, or evening, whenever you're watching this, I don't judge. I hope you guys have enjoyed this second episode of this series. It seems like people really did like the first one. I'm glad you guys are just as interested in weird old Minecraft worlds as I am, and I'll keep making these as long as I can find old maps. Next episode I'll be taking a look at some classic multiplayer maps with a special guest. In between then and now, I might just make a video or two looking at some other cool stuff as well. Like if you enjoyed the video, comment if you've got something cool to say, and subscribe if you enjoy subscribing, I guess. Thanks for watching.